Me and my team are heading to Dallas this September, and I'd love to meet you there in person. If you've ever thought about what it would be like to sit down with me and the Recruitment Coach team face-to-face, this is your chance. We're hosting the Recruitment Coach Live Summit on September 9th and 10th at the Jewel in Dallas, Texas. Here's the thing. Listening to a podcast is a very different experience from being in the room. Think about listening to a conversation, that's great, but participating in the conversation is even more valuable. You'll have access to me and my team in person for 2 whole days, plus you'll be surrounded by other recruitment business owners who are serious about growth. And this summit marks our 25th anniversary. I started Recruitment Coach in September 2001. So this is a milestone that we are excited to share with the people who've been part of this community, and I'd love you to be one of them. To learn more and register, visit recruitmentcoach.com/summit.
You mentioned earlier on about, if you'd been allowed just to do that BD part, that sort of time management. I think that's the thing that comes up for consultants all of the time, even more in this day and age. That's so much more difficult for people to do because the number of rabbit holes that you can go down as you're searching on LinkedIn for one thing, half an hour later, you're off down a totally different path.
Many recruitment firms chase scale by adding more headcount. Michelle Lownie has learned that bigger is not always better.
And it's a question I get asked a lot, actually, when interviewing people. How many hires are you looking to make? I never look to make hires. I look to find relationships with people that we can employ. And that's about them as an individual, not about the gap that we've got to fill or the perceived gap that we've got to fill.
After growing the business to nearly 70 people, Michelle and her co-founders made a decision that seems counterintuitive. Instead of continuing to scale at all costs, they restructured the business into a higher performing, more profitable team of 38 recruiters.
But I think it's the softer stuff, the less tangible things that keep people wedded to Eden Scott. I think it's about mutual trust, it's about ethics, it's about morals, it's about the way that we do business is mirrored very much in the way that our consultants do business.
Today, Eden Scott is one of Scotland's leading recruitment firms with annual revenue of £25 million. I'm Mark Whitby, and you're listening to the Resilient Recruiter podcast. My guest today is Michelle Lownie, the CEO and co-founder of Eden Scott. Michelle has spent more than 30 years in recruitment and brings a refreshingly honest perspective on leadership, culture, and how to build long-term sustainable success.
If we're having to put pressure on you to do your job, then I think we've probably passed the point of no return, because a good recruiter will put that pressure upon themselves. They will understand exactly what it is they need to do. And if you've got somebody that's pushing you all of the time in order to do the things that you need to do, then there's something that's not quite right in there.
In this episode, you'll hear why so many recruitment firms struggle when they scale, what Michelle specifically looks for when hiring recruiters, and how the business has continued to adapt through challenging market conditions. Hi, Michelle. Great to see you.
You too, Mark. Good morning.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. This is a special one because you and I worked together over 25 years ago. And so, and that was a really formative time in my recruitment career, the Melville Craig days. So, and I'm pleased to think that Chris and Guy are going to potentially listen to this conversation and get caught up with my news at the same time. So anyway, thank you very much for doing it.
No problem at all. Yes, it is. It's going back. I didn't quite realise it was 25 years. So thanks for that. You don't look a day older.
Well, thank you. You look great as well. I joined Melville Craig in 1998. And actually, I was curious to hear your story. How did you get into recruitment in the first place?
I think that's a great question because I've been interviewing recruitment consultants myself the last week or so as we look to kind of expand a couple of our teams. And it's always a question that I ask. And 9 out of 10 times the response is always, I fell into recruitment. And that's going to be my response as well. I fell into recruitment. I started with Melville Craig in 1989 on a sort of 6 to 8 week contract over the summer period. My dad knew somebody that knew Craig Patterson, who offered me a job filing and making cups of tea and showing people into their interview room. So I did that for 6 weeks and I stayed for 15 years.
Wow. So you literally started right at the bottom and worked your way up.
Very bottom. Yeah. Yep.
That's amazing. And I hadn't realized you were there for 15 years. That's an amazing period of time. It was a great business and really good staff tenure as well. There was a lot of experienced people in that business, which was great for me coming in because you absorb all the knowledge of the people around you and going on joint visits or doing joint interviews and that kind of stuff really accelerates your development. So, and then you guys struck off on your own and launched Eden Scott. What year would that have been?
2003.
2003. Okay, so 23 years you guys have been in business, which is an achievement in and of itself. Could you give a sort of flavor of the size and shape of the business now, what you guys specialize in and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So we've been on many iterations of Eden Scott over the past 23 years, but I would say for the last kind of 5 or 6 years, we've stayed very true and core to specific sectors. So we look at renewables, financial professional services, accountancy, finance, manufacturing technology, tech and digital, and we have a kind of couple of individuals that will look specifically at public sector. So we are 38 staff, currently recruiting. We've got turnover this year will probably be about 25 million. So fairly sizable. So a lot of contractors we've got, particularly out in the renewable space and in the tech and digital side. So yeah, we've got offices Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Glasgow. We work fully sort of hybrid. So we kind of ask consultants to come in 3 days per week. What 3 days those are and what hours they do in those 3 days, we're very, very flexible in relation to that. It's much more built on trust and you know how to do your job. You know, if you look through our kind of people on LinkedIn, you'll see that many of them have been with the business for many years, which is obviously something that we kind of took away from Melville Craig. People make the business. I know that sounds quite cliched and quite cheesy, but they genuinely do, which is why our strapline is the people business. And if we can kind of adopt that for our own staff and our own teams, then, we shouldn't really be selling ourselves as that. So
absolutely. Oh, it's one of those things, right? Like recruitment, ironically, recruiting companies often find it difficult to recruit internally, and then the retention in the industry is abysmal. And so it's not a very good advertisement for, what we provide in the market. So you guys definitely have that, staff retention and long tenure with your team and the development as well. I see people on LinkedIn and on your website, like really being promoted and taking on more responsibility as you guys grow, which is as it should be, really. So thanks for sharing. It's very much then multidisciplinary, sort of specialist practice areas, multi-office. Are you like recruiting only within Scotland, or is it UK wide or international? What's the sort of reach?
Again, I would say that we've had many, many conversations over the years. What about Manchester? What about London? Guy, Chris and I, a number of years ago, in fact, 15 years ago, took ourselves off to Singapore. Let's open a Singapore office. These would be all fantastic, amazing things to do. Actually, when you really kind of come back to it, there's a lot in Scotland. And I think a huge amount of what happens in Scotland in terms of building a business is about relationships. And I think that's really where Eden Scott kind of went out, because we're not very good at transactional recruitment of, here's a job, find a person, here's a job, find a person. We're much more orientated towards building good, strong relationships. We don't get it right every time. Sometimes we don't deliver. And I know that sounds a bit odd why would you say that? But that's the truth of the matter. You've got 100% success rate. I would question that. But I think it's really easy to kind of look at what's happening down south or look at what's happening abroad. Actually, to be able to wrap your arms around your business and really understand what's going on in it. Turnover is great, but profit is everything. It's important to really make sure that you're actually delivering a great quality service.
Absolutely. And yeah, I totally get that. There's certainly attractions and there's pros and cons to every, business model, right? And certainly things like the market size and the fee size in the US is attractive for a lot of UK businesses. But then on the other hand, as you mentioned, having that local market knowledge and like deep client relationships built over years and that reputation in the local market, I think is very difficult to replicate, if you're expanding kind of to other areas. So that's a huge asset really that doesn't necessarily appear on the balance sheet, but makes a massive difference to your success and longevity of your business.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of our consultants work really well when they have that personal relationship with their client. It's much more difficult when things are portal led and it's a sort of, let's upload lots of CVs, let's hope a couple of them stick. That's not about building good, strong relationships, about understanding where pain points are in a person's business. And job descriptions are amazing things. They tell you lots of stuff about, what an individual organisation is looking for. But actually, it's the things that's not in the job description that tell you a huge amount more. And you get that through conversations and asking the right questions and exploring areas in different ways. And actually really sort of sometimes just kind of holding up a mirror to the client and saying, is this really what you're looking for? You might think this, but actually this is what's happening in the market. And that's where the job title recruitment consultant comes in. Otherwise it would just be recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that distinction of true consultancy, right? Where you're not just get a job, fill a job, as you say, more transactional, but you're able to advise the client and help them to even shape the job description, or maybe what they think they're looking for isn't what they need. And then really guiding them through the entire life cycle of that hire successfully, which means also sometimes standing up to the client, right? And, rather than just being an order taker and then going off on a wild goose chase to try and fill a job, which is not really well formed. So I love the distinction of like, most people have recruitment consultant on their business card, but it's not necessarily a true reflection of what they do. We should introduce your co-founder. So Guy Martin and Chris Logue, you guys started the business together. I noticed you've landed in the CEO seat. Well, how does that? How do you guys split the responsibilities between the co-founders?
So I landed in the chief exec seat because of COVID. Really, I guess when that happened, we, like the rest of the industry, like the rest of the world, virtually stopped overnight. Everybody's sent home. Everybody remembers that announcement on the TV, and I think everybody at that point thought, well, we'll be back in the office a couple of weeks' time. Things will just go back to kind of normal. And obviously that's not what happened. And then the furlough scheme was introduced. I think at that time we probably had about 65 staff, the majority of whom were put onto furlough. And we had a core in the business left. I think there was 9, maybe 10 of us. And I was working a lot on the NHS. So I had to be in the business to deliver the work that I was doing. Guy and Chris didn't. So they were furloughed along with the rest of the other people. And that, whilst it was a very painful time, was actually probably the best of times as well, because we really, that core team took that opportunity to understand what does this business look like just now? What do we actually want it to look like as we move out of COVID? So we went through a redundancy program. That was really difficult. It was hard. It's always hard. But actually making that really difficult decision really then propelled us on to make some fundamental changes. And part of that was me stepping into that chief exec's role. Because up until that point, we had 3 directors in the business, no real kind of distinct areas of accountability. I think sometimes it was quite confusing for teams, individuals. Sometimes if they didn't like the answer that they got to a question that they asked of one, they would then go to the other and get most of the time the same answer, but maybe a slightly different version of that. So it was confusing, and there was no real there was general accountability, but not really specific accountability. And I think Chris, you maybe want to get him on a podcast at another point to answer that question. But I think Chris was really quite keen just to kind of take that step back. So he's not actively day-to-day involved in the business, but he's a lifelong friend. We see him all the time. We go on holidays together. And he's very much not involved day to day, but he knows what's happening within the business. He's regularly updated. He still gets all of the emails, etc. But he's got 2 grandchildren now, and he's off living his best life, which is fantastic.
That's kind of the dream, isn't it, Michelle? Like when you're building a business to get to a stage where the business runs without your day-to-day involvement is kind of like, it's very difficult. What you guys have achieved is remarkable, but most people don't get that to that stage. I agree 100% with what you're saying. I think the challenge with having partnerships or multiple directors, you really do, to drive a company forward, you really do need one person who's in charge day to day, making those decisions and that clear reporting line. So that makes total sense. But I wanted to ask you about the process, the redundancies and everything. That's like the worst part of being a business owner, isn't it? And it sounds like you guys had scaled way beyond the size, at least in terms of headcount, that you are now. What was the strategy to sort of almost build a leaner organization? What was the thinking behind that, and how has that worked out over the subsequent years up until now?
Yeah, so we've kind of kept that core staff of 35 to 40. I think that is our absolute sweet spot. Can I see us growing up to 60, 70 staff again? Actually, no, I can't. So you might get higher turnover, but with scale, there comes opportunity, but also with scale, there comes problems. And challenges, different types of challenges. And actually, what we're really looking for is a core of staff that are consistently delivering business plans or delivering above and beyond business plans. We seem to spend an awful lot of our time pre-COVID managing underperformance, and a lot of kind of under the surface of it infighting about, well, that's my vacancy or that's my client, or I spoke to them so many, and just that kind of breed of recruiter that really is not a team player. And again, I know that maybe sounds a bit of a strange thing to say, because recruitment is an individual. We're salespeople. We're very much about targets. We're very much about delivering business plans. But there has to be that core collegiate feeling and understanding, and actually a core in terms of your ethics and your values about how you deliver the service that you do. Pre-COVID, we had quite a number of consultants that would take that approach of, well, here's a placement, let's stick it up. Let's move on to the next one. There's no candidate care. There's no client care there. Some really strange terms and conditions of business being agreed and signed off that, we subsequently found out, sometime later. That's not what the Eaton Scott brand is about. It's never been about let's fill jobs. It's been about how do we contribute to the Scottish economy? How do we contribute to the people that are around and about us? Which is why the Talent Spark brand was kind of born to help scaling businesses who might not be able to kind of fully engage in what you might deem as a traditional recruitment relationship with an agency or a traditional recruitment process. So going through that redundancy was a difficult process, but it was the right thing to do. And I think if you always come back to what are we trying to do here? What is it we're trying to achieve? What are the steps that we need to take in order to be able to do that? And redundancy really was the way forward.
Listen, having a ChatGPT license for your team is great, but it is not enough. ChatGPT requires you to stop what you're doing, switch windows, copy information, and ask it to do something. AI agents are different. They're built into your workflow and they take action automatically. Recruiter Flow is an AI-first ATS and CRM with built-in AI agents working for you around the clock. Their encoding agent structures your data. Their job change alert agent monitors your database for opportunities. Their note-taking agent captures conversations and updates your CRM. This isn't about working harder. It's about letting AI handle the busy work so you can focus on relationships. To see it in action, go to recruitmentcoach.com/recruiterflow. Wow, that was really interesting. There's a few things I wanted to pick up on. So let's circle back to the Talent Spark, because I'd like to learn more about that. But it's interesting because what I'm seeing now, especially as, companies are getting to grips with AI, that increasing headcount for the sake of it is no longer smart, if it ever was. I think more companies are realizing headcount is more of a vanity metric, so you can say, look how much we've grown. But, it might actually be, as you mentioned earlier, profitability is really the hallmark of a successful business. And as well as the bigger picture of, the culture, are the team aligned with the values that, and the behaviors that we represent, and in what way are we fulfilling a mission within the wider picture of like the team, the community, and the businesses we serve, and so on. So I think you are almost ahead of the trend, which is now looking at leaner businesses focused on fewer, higher performing consultants, rather than a bloated business where, you're dealing with more problems, but without more profit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So super interesting. So I guess before we talk about Talent Spark, I'd love to hear, one more thing I want to ask you. You've referenced business plans a few times. Can you say about how you guys use business plans at maybe a company, team, and maybe even an individual level to drive the business?
So we have consultants. So we have a couple of researchers. We have consultants. We have seniors, and then what we probably call business managers, and then our directors who kind of run those teams. And generally speaking, a recruitment consultant will have a business plan of 140K. Seniors, you may be talking up to 170. Business managers up to 250. And there's no real rocket science involved in it or any kind of magical thing that happens, because what we do is we add all of that together, and that gives us our business plan for the financial year. And we always look for a bit of stretch, a bit of growth. So we have our core business plan. What is it we need to do to reach that number? What is it we'd really like to try and do? So we have that as our kind of stretch business plan. So we've got models that will say, if we settle this amount of business, this is the profit that will be made from that. And actually, again, I think like any good recruitment consultant who sits at the beginning of the year, or has sort of placements to go through, they're sitting there working out, well, if I do this, this is the commission that I will get, which then allows me to buy a car or a deposit for a flat or, a new pair of sunglasses, whatever it happens to be, whatever floats your boat. We're no different to that as a business. The more that we can do, the more profit that we'll make. And that's what motivates all of us. The profit is really about giving us the opportunity to make decisions. What do we want to invest in? What do we want to do more of? Where are our core areas of hiring? Because whilst we don't want to get to those 60, 70 numbers, you need to consistently be on that journey of hiring. And it's a question I get asked a lot, actually, when interviewing people. How many hires are you looking to make? I never look to make hires. I look to find relationships with people that we can employ. And that's about them as an individual, not about the gap that we've got to fill or the perceived gap that we've got to fill. So if you think about renewables as a growing sector, a great sector for the Scottish economy, it is for us as a business. We could easily take another 5, 6 people and put them in there. Is that the right thing to do? No, it's not. It's about making sure that we add, so that we bring people in who will add to the pot and not dilute. And again, the other question that I always get asked is what desk have you got sitting there? There's no desk sitting there. You're a recruitment consultant, you're a salesperson. You need to come in and build that desk.
You guys have a 360 model where everyone does both BD and recruiting?
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's interesting because that's what I grew up in. And it seems like the trend now is split desk. So you have salespeople and you have the delivery people. And again, there's no perfect business model, right? Everything has pros and cons. Why have you guys remained true to the full desk model?
I think we remain true to the full desk model because it's what we know. It's what I grew up in. I firmly believe that if you go out there and you sell something, you then need to deliver upon that. And I think you're absolutely right. I think for sort of volume contracts, it's great to have that person going out there, developing that piece of business, building that relationship, really understanding how that contract works. And then you have resourcers who meet those demands. But if you look at the core of our clients, they are SMEs. They're not sort of big blue chips. They're not, huge financial service organizations. Although we do some work in that area. But again, it's not portal-led recruitment. It's about relationships. And if you've got somebody that takes that vacancy on and sits in that client meeting and asks all of those pertinent questions, that person is the one with the knowledge, with the best understanding of what that client is looking for. And it's somewhat diluted if you're taking that back to a team of people who are then looking at that. So that relationship is really strong. It's really tight. And that's why we've got a lot of core clients, a lot of repeat business, because the person that's sold the, yes, I can find that individual for you, is actually the person that takes that process through its whole journey.
It's super interesting. And is because people ask me all the time as a coach, like, should we do 360? Should we do split desk? And there isn't really one answer to that question, but I'm glad that you guys are an example of a company that's extremely successful with the 360 model that isn't dead. It does still work, because that's what I've heard some people in the market saying, 360 doesn't work anymore because, the generation of people coming through aren't able to do it and various other reasons. But you guys are proof that it can work. I do think, like, from my point of view, looking back, I think I would have been better in a pure sales role, because I was much better at business development than recruiting. And also my Achilles heel was time management and juggling everything. And so the amount of time I spent like spinning plates and if I had just been able to crack on with opening accounts and, building relationships with the client, I think I would have built more. But, I still did well, and so I can't argue with the success you guys have built. What would you say are some of the keys to the success you've had, Michelle? Like looking at a business of the size you guys have built, which is rare. There's not many companies that have achieved what you guys have achieved. What do you put that down to? What are some of the critical success factors, if I can put it that way?
I think there's periods and points in time that have probably been quite significant for Eden Scott. But I would say that the sort of underlying ethos of the business and the organisation is about delivering a great service, about consistency. That's consistency in terms of its three owners. We've been very key and instrumental at different points in all of our careers within the business. I think there is things like the crash in 2008. We'd our biggest team in 2008 was construction. Our most profitable team in 2008 was construction. I think we had about 10 people in that. And again, a bit like COVID, it just sort of fell off a cliff overnight. And actually we had, those are the scenes where you had people kind of walking out of huge offices in Canary Wharf with their cardboard boxes with all their possessions in it. And again, it was that sort of really frightening time of, gosh, when is this going to end? What's going to happen here? And actually we took a load of people in the construction team and put them into the renewable energy sector. We opened an office in Aberdeen, hired a key person in there, set that up as a separate organisation. So that was Eden Scott Aberdeen Limited. The only way we could really attract that individual was so that he had part of an organisation. He wasn't just an employee. And that was fantastic for us for, 5-6 years. And, we used to sit down in the Central Belt and just look at these guys up in Aberdeen, recruiting and filling all of these jobs, contractors, permanent stuff. And, we used to say to them, it's just like shooting fish in a barrel for you. It's so easy, what you do. I'm
sure they pushed back on that and said, what are you talking about? This is hard. We're just bloody good at it.
And actually, look at Aberdeen and it's a totally different situation. So that was really, really pivotal for us as an organisation. It's about taking chances and opportunities, about hiring great people. Again, if you get anybody that sits on this podcast and says they get that right all of the time, I would severely challenge that, because I think you said earlier on, Mark, one of the most difficult things we do as a business is hire our own people, which is completely ironic. But it is so difficult, because I think that you can get a fantastic recruiter in a competitor, or somebody that's coming from within the industry, and they've been phenomenally successful within that business where they are, and they come across a business like ours. And sometimes they do go on and be really, really successful, but it takes them a time to bed in and just to readjust to the way that we work and the way that we operate. And then sometimes people come in and actually it just doesn't work out for them in our environment, whether that's because they're used to working in a very structured way where they've got very specific KPIs and somebody always on the back of them saying, have you done it? Have you done it? We're much more focused on giving people ownership and accountability, of taking responsibility. You need to do the sales. You need to business develop. You need to meet with candidates. And if we're having to tell you that that's what you need to do all of the time, that's micromanagement, and that's not what it's not that we're not good at it. It's not what we want to be.
I get it. That makes sense. So I'd love to hear more about your hiring process. But before we do that, my observation then is when you're talking about this sort of pivotal moments in the company history, it has been times when there's been a crisis and then you have turned that into an opportunity. So like the recession being one, taking the construction team and then redeploying them in a growth market, which is the renewable sector, then the pandemic, using the opportunity to really reshape the organization and make it a higher performing one. So I think that's super interesting. You mentioned earlier that you do have, obviously nobody, when you're hiring, whether it's in recruitment or in any industry, you're never going to have 100% success rate, right? Because we're dealing with human beings, and until someone is in your environment, you never know if it's going to all work out. But you have been successful in, hiring and developing people who have been extremely, high performing. I guess there's two sides to that coin. First of all, how do you recruit and interview in order to identify who's most likely to be successful for Eden Scott? And number two is, how do you hold on to those top producers?
Yeah, so we're in the process of hiring in key sectors at the moment. So it's identifying individuals, approaching them mainly via LinkedIn, having an initial conversation with them. We would then meet face to face a couple of times. We would generally ask somebody to come in and not quite make a presentation, although a presentation is generally where they end up, but asking them to come in and say, well, if you were starting with us, how do you build a desk? What would that look like? Where are your sort of areas of focus? What is it you want to try and do? What is it you're not able to do where you are at the moment? And if you're not, why not? So, what are the drivers for you having that conversation with us? So we've reached out to you, but why have you responded to that? So what's that hook? Is it us as an organisation? What's the push? What's the pull here? So really kind of exploring that. We try to make that process as quick as possible in terms of the length of time that it takes, but being thorough about it. So we don't want something that's dragging on for, 3, 4, 6 weeks to 8 weeks, that kind of thing, but making sure that we're going in. And the other thing that we do is that they're seen by different people within the business. So they're getting a different perspective. They're not just getting that sales pitch from me or from, the kind of hiring manager who ultimately they would report to. So they're getting to see various people within the business. The other thing that we don't do is we don't discuss candidates in between interviews. So that when we come together at the end of that process, we're all able to put our thoughts across. So there's none of that real kind of unconscious bias in there, and just kind of taking that out. And we're very respectful around each other's thoughts, what they saw, things that perhaps you as an interviewer maybe didn't pick up on because you're specifically looking at one area, or it's not structured in that it's a competency based and we're following a set of questions, but we tend to ask the same sort of questions, maybe in different orders. Some people will have much more interest round about really digging into an individual's figures and percentages to business plans. I'm a bit more about, how did you get here? How did you come into recruitment? What makes you want to stay in it? How do you like to do businesses? Share with me your biggest success. What are you most proud of? Where do you think some of your challenges have been and why haven't you succeeded in certain things? And ultimately, where is it you want to be? Where do you want to end up? And what does good look like for you? Because we've all got different degrees of what that looks like for us as individuals. So it's structured, but it's not rigid, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. So
and how do we hold on to them?
Hold on, just before you answer that, Michelle, I wanted to reflect on what you just shared. So one thing that you guys do really well is you go out and headhunt people to bring them into your organization, which, funnily enough, not many recruiting firms do for some reason, which is ironic, again, considering that's like, we are recruiters, but so why not recruit your own staff that way. And I remember being recruited by Chris and going through that process many years ago. I like that as you get multiple people's perspectives in the process, that you get them to do a presentation. The questioning sounds very rigorous and really digging into things. It sounds like you have multiple stages, but you try and keep it over a shorter kind of time frame. But I guess the question is, what is the deciding factor? Like, what are you looking for to decide yes or no? Like, what would, when you're coming back together to discuss your individual observations from those interviews, how do you make the call?
So I guess first things first, we don't always agree, which is interesting. But it's
Do you
good.
need to all agree for it to be yes? Does it have to be unanimous, or?
It doesn't need to be unanimous. No, definitely not. But you have to be open to that challenge of, why is one saying yes and why would one say no? What are your red flags? And I've sat in recruitment processes, and even Scott, I've sat in recruitment processes in Melville Craig back in the day, where there's been comments like, well, let's just take a chance, let's just take a punt. That's what probably got us to 65 or 70 people. So let's circle back and think that's not the right thing to do here. And I think when you've got a smaller business like Eden Scott, bringing in somebody that doesn't fit in there culturally, if they're so far removed from where we are and what we do, can be really damaging, and it can be really, really, really difficult. So what I would always say yes to is if I can feel that kind of real, genuine interest about wanting to work for Eden Scott, and it not just being a job, about it being a vacation, somebody that's got strong values, somebody who wants to be successful, somebody who wants to make money. And I don't think we should shy away from that. Somebody who wants to find jobs for other people, I would suggest is probably not, or Eden Scott's not the right home for you, because going back, we are that 360. We can't start to find people jobs until we find the clients. So we've got to have, that you've got to be able to do that part before you get to do the other parts. And you mentioned earlier on about, if you'd been allowed just to do that BD part of it, that sort of time management. I think that's the thing that comes up for consultants all of the time. And I think even more in this day and age, that's so much more difficult for people to do, because the number of rabbit holes that you can go down as you're searching on LinkedIn for one thing, half an hour later, you're off down a totally different path. You can see it with the young guys out there, in the Instagram and stuff. You go in to look at something, and there you are 45 minutes later, and you're still sort of scrolling through screeds and screeds of just white noise coming at you.
There's so much more distraction. Like when we worked together, there was no LinkedIn. We only just had like the World Wide Web, right? And so there were only limited routes. You could pick up the phone, you could send an email, or you could go and visit someone, or you might go to an event and meet someone there. But that was pretty much it. So
absolutely,
it was perhaps easier to stay focused. So remind me to circle back. Once we talk about retention, I'd like to hear what are the biggest changes that you guys are finding, and how are you adapting to the market in 2026? But I interrupted you before you had a chance to talk about your staff retention and how you intentionally create that. Some months you're flooded with jobs and make multiple placements. Other months, a big fat zero. This feast and famine cycle isn't just stressful, it's holding you back and keeping you from real predictable growth. Here's the good news. There's a reason it's happening, and you can fix it. The 7-Figure Freedom Scorecard is a free tool designed for recruitment business owners. In less than 10 minutes, it evaluates your firm across the 6 key pillars of sustainable growth: clients, candidates, team, operations, marketing, and strategy. Your personalized scorecard will reveal what's working and what's broken and the fastest way to build a recruitment business that generates consistent 7-figure revenue month after month. Stop riding the revenue roller coaster and take the free scorecard now at recruitmentcoach.com/scorecard.
Again, I think one of the questions that I'm asked most during an interview process is, what is the culture like? I think as a business owner, that's a really difficult question to answer because I don't set the culture. The culture's not me. The culture is all of us, and it's incumbent upon all of us to create a culture that makes people want to come to work, that people enjoy what it is they do, that it's a psychologically safe environment for them to come in and to do their job. We're very flexible in terms of our approach to people coming in. I think that is really key. There's a number of So whilst we ask people to come into the office sort of 3 days a week, what those 3 days look like is entirely up to them. They could come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they could come Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There might be a week where actually they've got a couple of client meetings, so they only come in 1 day a week. They might come in at 8 a.m. and leave at lunchtime because they've got something to do. So we don't have a clock in, clock out system. Where are you going? What are you doing? When are you going to be back? So there is that real flexibility in there. And actually, as you're starting to speak to a lot of competitors at this moment in time, because we are hiring, a lot of our competitors are back in 4 days a week, some of them in 5 days a week, and it's back to that Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I think the whole world has moved on, from that, and trying to push that genie back into the bottle is really difficult. So I think that is key to retention. We pay good salaries. We have a really strong commission structure. So you earn commission from, the first temp that you put out. It works on a quarterly basis, but it pays out monthly. So the quicker you move through those layers, the quicker you get to that sort of higher percentage. We offer additional bonuses for retained assignments. We offer additional bonuses for fees that are agreed above standard fees. We have high performer lunch clubs, which we're just actually in the process of changing, because it used to be that you needed to reach a certain number in a month. And actually that's really difficult for somebody that starts in the business, or it's really difficult sometimes for somebody that does temp. So they don't have that sort of luxury of a great score landing that will sort of tip them over. So I've actually changed that, and it will be now moving forward related to your business plan. So if you're not reaching that magical number, but you're on a business plan, you get to come along to that lunch as well. You can get additional holidays. We have things like sabbaticals after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So there's all of those things, but I think it's the softer stuff, the less tangible things that keep people wedded to Eden Scott. I think it's about mutual trust. It's about ethics. It's about morals. It's about the way that we do business is mirrored very much in the way that our consultants do business. And also, I think a big thing for me is that we're not looking for somebody to fill a job. We're not looking for somebody that can make a score. So we're not sitting here after sort of 3 weeks and going, well, where's your first placement? Because I think, push comes to shove, most people can fill a job. Takes a really good recruitment consultant to bill consistently, week in, week out, year in, year out. And in order to be able to do that, people need to have quite a lot of runway in front of them.
That's super interesting. And there's been a consistent theme through this conversation of, that consistency over time has been kind of core to your success. A couple of things I wanted to pick up on. Most recent thing you said was the runway, especially in a 3-6, essentially what you're asking someone to do is build their desk, right? And how long do you think that takes on average for someone to really be fully up to speed and billing consistently?
So I think there's probably a couple of variations that you might want to consider in there. So if somebody's coming in, for example, to set up a temp desk, you would look for results, I think, quite quickly, because that's just the nature of a temp recruiter. You know, they've got their core clients, they've got their temps, their contractors, they've got their traitor temps. You know, a good temp recruiter will place somebody in a job and think, well, where's that temp come from? Let's make a phone call into that client. So they're much more fast paced. So you would expect to see results from a temp person much more quickly. Equally, if they're coming into an established team, you would probably want to start seeing results quicker. If you've got somebody that's coming in to set up what is quite a new niche for you in terms of a discipline, that's a much longer period of time. What I would say, though, is that I would always look for iterative changes at each stage of the process. So if we're sitting there after 3 months and we've had no client meetings, or we've not had the whiff of a job, or that would start to be, I think, quite concerning. But if you're building that pipeline so that when you get into that 6 month mark, you can see 6 months moving forward, we're going to start having that consistent delivery of vacancies filled.
It's interesting. And that's a good answer. That definitely makes sense. So you're looking for effort and progress, really. Like, can we see things happening? Are they doing the right things? Is the pipeline building? And if they are doing the right things, then the placements will follow. Actually, that was my experience working for Chris Logue, because when I joined Melville Craig, even though I had some experience, it didn't click right away, and it took me longer than I would have liked to really start performing. And so, which I was not happy with. Obviously, I felt like I wanted to prove that, Chris had made the right decision by hiring, but he was like, "Don't worry, Mark. I have every confidence. I can see what you're doing, and the results will come." Which, that was, having that attitude was then made me want to work even harder, right?
Yeah.
So
I think that's really key, Mark, because, the same is true 25 years later. If we're having to put pressure on you to do your job, then I think we've probably passed the point of no return, because a good recruiter will put that pressure upon themselves. They will understand exactly what it is they need to do. And if you've got somebody that's pushing you all of the time in order to do the things that you need to do, then there's something that's not quite right in there. But I always say trust in the process. If you are doing all of these things, it will come. If you're doing all of these things consistently, it will come, it will happen. It's where the inconsistencies come in, where you do that bit of business development, get that job on, spend a lot of time filling that job, and then go back to the business development again, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later. That just doesn't work. You need to be doing each stage of the process all of the time.
All the time. Exactly. Absolutely. So you guys have been very good at evolving when there's been real shifts in the market. So we talked about the 2008 recession, the pandemic. What do you see in the market happening right now? How's the landscape shifting, and how are you guys adapting in order to continue to grow and thrive in the coming years?
Gosh, I think if I had the answer to that question, I would be I would be franchising myself out. I would say that the last year to 18 months has probably been one of the hardest periods. And I think that's because it has been so long. There's been little growth. And actually, I think you can deal with periods where there is recession. And if you're going into that really deeply, but you're coming out of it quite quickly, as we did in sort of 2008, or, we had COVID, but we had all of that sort of support wrapped around us at that point, which allowed you to kind of continue on, whether that was CBILS loans or, furlough schemes, etc. So the costs of your business were greatly reduced. and quite frankly, nobody went anywhere. So all we ever did as a core of 10 was work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, because there was nothing else to do anyway. But I think the last 18 months has been really quite difficult because it has been flat. And there has been wave after wave after wave of, changes, whether those are politically, locally, politically, nationally, politically, globally. Everything has kind of affected us. So I would say for the last 18 months, it's just been a case of putting your head down, working really hard, sticking to your core, and doing all of the things. Now I feel is the right time to really start hiring into our core areas. Where do we go with AI? Where do we go with, are we actually going to have accountants churning numbers, in 3 or 4 years' time or 6 years' time? I actually don't know the answer to that question, which I realise might be quite disappointing, but I'm not sure anybody really knows the answer to that question. What I do know is that I think what I believe is that I think our younger generation, I see this with my daughter at school at the moment, she's sitting her Nat 5s. I'll say things to her like, that's a good essay. Let's have a look at Copilot, get some information from that. Let's sort of see, oh no, we're not allowed to use that. Oh no, you get into trouble if you use that in school. In fact, she knows somebody that was given a detention because they'd been using AI. I think that's wrong. I think we should not be discouraging our kids. We should not be discouraging the world from using AI. We should be embracing it, and we should be finding the right way to use it so that it's used as a complementary to what we do, not to replace us. And I think if you make your kids fear it, then that's wrong.
It's really interesting you say that, Michelle, because I've got the same thing. Like I'm finding my kids, I've got 3 kids. They are, 2 out of 3 are very anti-AI. And I think it's partly because of the way that the education system has framed it is like reaction, like, it's too easy for kids to cheat now. So we need to absolutely put these strict, like you can't use it at all and so on. And so it's partly a reaction to that. And then it's partly also, I'm sure, fear and uncertainty about like, well, what job will I have in the future if everything's going to be done by AI? So I think, ironically, our like working age people are maybe embracing AI more than the younger people are. Talent Spark, we've got just a couple of minutes left. Tell me about Talent Spark, because I saw on your website that's a kind of a brand within Eden Scott. How does that work? What's it all about?
Yeah. So I guess Talent Spark is actually the brainchild of Guy, because it very much feeds into the sectors where his experience and his knowledge lies. So that sort of deep tech, semiconductor, startup community. He's a lot of personal interest in the startup community in terms of private investments and being part of that world. And you asked earlier on about Guy and Chris and what they were doing, and we covered off Chris, who's got obviously a couple of grandkids. Guy, whilst he's not sort of operationally day-to-day involved in the business, he actually still takes on key assignments. He still fills, some jobs, but he probably his main focus is about rainmaking for others. He's always at different events, here, there, and everywhere, whether that's universities or whatever. So he's still very well networked within his sector. And Talent Spark really feeds into that startup community and how you help an organisation grow its employees, but grow its brand. It's very different going out there and recruiting somebody to work for a startup versus a similar type of role within a Skyscanner. And I think Skyscanner is probably the best example of an early startup client, Talent Spark client. We started off with a couple of vacancies in Skyscanner, through the kind of Talent Spark brand, and actually ended up with about 6 or 7 people on site at Skyscanner as they went through that massive growth journey. So that's what the Talent Spark brand is about. And it's that sort of access into somebody like Ewan Anderson, who's our marketing director, who's great at helping people understand that power of an employment brand. And so they get access to more than just how to fill a job. So you very often get somebody that will come from a startup and say, I need a CTO. Actually, that's not really what you need. And I think in bigger organizations, making the wrong hire can be really damaging, but there's a sort of real community around about that to sort of minimize the impact of that. You bring somebody into an organization that's got, it's going to be employee 3 or number 4, and it doesn't work out, it can be the difference between success and failure. So the Talent Spark brand is there to help support all of the things wrapped around about recruitment, as well as finding the individual to join the organization.
That's cool. So how long I didn't realize it was, you had that legacy with, Skyscanner and so on. How long has Talent Spark been going?
Gosh, that's a great question. Probably about 15, 16 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you've got a real emphasis and around startup companies and helping them scale. That's awesome, Michelle. Look, we've covered a lot today, and we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for doing this. Really, really enjoyed it, sharing your wisdom of the challenges and how you've overcome them. I think that's especially valuable for people to hear. Also for people to hear that even you guys have found it the last 18 months tough, because I think a lot of people are feeling that and wondering if it's just them. Quick story for you. Next time you're seeing Chris, then see if he remembers this. So I set myself a goal that I was going to double my billings, and I wrote my own individual business plan. I know, you guys have your business plan as a company and departments. I wrote one for myself. I presented it to Chris, and he loved this idea. And then he made all my colleagues in the sales and marketing team do it as well. I don't think they were that happy.
Maybe popular.
No, exactly. But I also asked Melville Craig to pay I wanted to go to Tony Robbins' firewalking event in London. And Chris looked at the brochure and he was like, totally not his cup of tea. And he was quite skeptical of it. And he said he would split it with me. So, because you could see it was partly business and partly personal related. So he said, I'll split the cost with you, go half. And I said, I'm going to double my billings this year. And this is going to help me. And he said, Mark, if you double your billings, I will walk on the fire. So I don't think he ever did. So it'd be interesting to see if he ever did the firewalk, because I did manage to double my billings that year.
Okay, so I'm seeing Chris next Thursday for lunch, and I'll sign him up for a firewalk for you.
Fantastic. Michelle, this has been awesome. Really nice to catch up with you after all this time. And let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks very much, Mark. I really enjoyed that.
Take care. Thank you for listening to The Resilient Recruiter. I know how busy recruiters are, so I'm honored that you're investing this time with me each week. I don't take your attention for granted. That's why I'm going all out to deliver value for you here, real insights you can apply to improve your business. And if you really want to help me to reach a wider audience and impact more people, please consider leaving the show a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you leave me a review, please reach out and let me know so I can thank you personally. Please hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.